I'm going to take just a moment to introduce everyone sitting here on the stage, and then we'll launch into what it promises to be a very interesting conversation. To my farthest right is Don Lenina, who all of you know and has been working very hard over the past few days to make this conference a success. And beside him is the Honourable Judy Foote, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement for the Government of Canada. Wouters, who you also know, former Clerk of the Privy Council and Strategic Counsel at McCarthy-Tétrault. Beside him, the Honourable Deb Matthews, Deputy Premier of the Government of Ontario's, I like it so much I said it twice. And, and Mark Barrenechea, who's the CEO of OpenText, as recognized one of the premier sponsors for the event today. That means over to you, Don. Yeah.
I saw him grimace at me. Greetings, everyone. First of all, let me just make a little housekeeping announcement. It's wonderful to see that there's this many people still sitting out there in the chairs. Usually when I go to a conference by this time, there are a few people and a few people and a few people, and you're all still out there. That's wonderful. Because we have lots of work for you to do, and we've got, I think, a really interesting session to get you started. I do want to say I know that a few people have to leave. Indeed, Minister, I know that you have a plane to catch, part of a minister's duties. So we will try to finish this. We will finish this promptly by 3 o'clock. And I know that some of you will have to move on then. I have to take a little bit of time here and give you the context for what we're trying to do. I hate to use my time when we have a panel like we do, but I think I need to set the stage. So let me start by saying this, is the whole point of this conference is to explore open dialogue. And open dialogue, ideally, is guided by principles. And you've probably heard us talking about the principles. You've probably seen some of the stuff. What we've done leading up to this conference is we've gone out and we've plumbed social media. Lots of you participated. We drew on the work from the governments of Ontario and the government of Canada, work they've done on principles to guide open dialogue. And we took all that and we put it together in a draft of some principles that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Some of you will have seen this, some of you may not have. But the point of this conference, by the time we conclude, in the next couple of hours after this, is to let you do some work on refining these as well. And what we really want to do with this panel is these are people who get to make the decisions about this. You guys are all the people out there who have to do the hard work of making open dialogue work. So if you want some real insight into direction from what's coming from the top, this is an opportunity to get it. We really want to give these people, leaders, decision makers from different points of view, an opportunity to respond to these draft principles and give you some idea what does it look like from their point of view. And you even get to come up to the microphone and question them. And they will be open and transparent in their answers, they tell me. Is that true? Excellent. What I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to take just a few minutes to go through the principles very quickly, just so that those of you who haven't seen it get some idea what the draft looks like. And I should mention, you'll hear more about this later, these will be posted for further discussion after the conference for a week or so, and we hope to finalize them shortly after that. These principles are really, we I guess, put them into buckets, 4 basic streams or themes under which they're gathered. The first one is called acknowledge the community. And really the 4 key ideas here, first and foremost, is what we call right fit. And right fit simply means this, it's very important. There are different kinds of dialogue processes, and you better match the right process with the right problem. I always say, if I could tell you anything based on my experience, that's the single most important thing you could learn. So you should have the right fit, that's a principle. Inclusive, I don't have to say a lot about this, we've talked about it through the conference. If you want legitimate and well-informed discussions or dialogues, you need to be inclusive of the people and the interests that are represented by that issue. Open and respectful. Respectful is absolutely critical. This means that you not only sit down and say what you want to say, you have to be willing to listen to others who are participating in that discussion. If you're not respectful, if you're not listening to others, if you don't find yourself changing your mind somewhere along the line, you've made a serious mistake. You've got to be respectful. And finally, it should be accessible. Indeed, it's the law, at least in Ontario, that it be accessible, that we should make it available to people of all abilities and all opportunities to participate in these processes. The second big theme here is focus on impact and outcomes. In some sense, nothing could be more obvious, I hope. But there are a few bullets under here. Measurement. We need to measure for these things and make sure that they are producing the kind of outcomes and so on, the goals that we have set for ourselves in the process. Relevance and scope. This is one of my favorite. What it really says is that from the time you launch a process and design it, the people who actually have to make the decisions about these, along with the people who are designing them, should decide really what is this all about? What's the limits that we're creating? People who are going to participate in this discussion have to know what's up for grabs and what isn't. I shouldn't put it for grabs. What's up for discussion and what isn't. So there are boundaries. It has to be relevance. There has to be scope. That's how you keep people inside a reasonable discussion and keep it focused. Trustworthy. Once you set the boundaries, once you tell people what the scope is, government has to respect those. People want to know that they can trust the commitment that government makes in order to actually carry out such dialogues. That's the focus and impact on impact and outcomes. The third stream that we have here, or theme, is emphasize transparency and evidence. Publicized, really what this means is that there should be an opportunity to inform the public so the public knows what sort of processes are available, what's going on. They should be informed, and what that means is documents and information relevant to the process should be available to the participants. You can't hoard information. Sorry, it's not acceptable. Also, participants should be able to introduce information and documents as relevant in a way that actually has a chance to be heard in the process. And finally, transparent, which simply means that decisions that come from this, that are made in the process or that result from the process, the rationale behind them should be explained in one form or another so people know how we got to the conclusion that we got to. That may come after the process, it may come during the process, depending what it is. And finally, the fourth theme here is embrace innovation and transformation. This is just good, I think, practical stuff. Be innovative. Government should be essentially looking to use new tools and new opportunities. They should be looking to learn and improve how they do these processes. That's what we're here to talk about. How do we use new tools? How do we use new kinds of processes? How do we do it well? That should be a principle of operation here. And finally, they should be transformative. This is a great one to end on. Transformative means it should change us. There is a culture of openness. What does it take? And it should be a principle, a commitment, that in learning about these processes and developing them and delivering them, that we are creating a culture that actually changes the way we do things. And that's the thing I really want to hear these people talk about. Having said all that, I've now taken up a lot of the time, more than I would have wished, but I'm going to do this, I'm probably just going to flip a switch here, and I suspect the conversation will carry itself. We shall see. But what I will do, just to get it started, is I want to pose one basic question, or perhaps three little questions inside a basic one, and just give each of our panelists a chance to, off the top, to respond to that, and then we'll let them go at each other. So first of all, the question I really want to ask is, where are we now on these principles? Ministers and others. In other words, for example, is there anything missing here that you would put in? Is there anything here that makes you uncomfortable that you think is going to be tough for you? Tell us about it. And finally, how far do you think your government is along on this? Are we making actual progress? Or are we a long way from the principles? Are we already there and we can all go home? And with that, I will say, Minister Foote, over to you.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to join my colleagues here on the platform and have an opportunity to speak to all of you and have a discussion about the principles that you've enunciated here. When I look at acknowledge the community and then go down and look at embrace innovation and transformation, I can tell you that coming into the Department of Public Services and Procurement, and I walk into the building over in Portage, what I found was there was so little eye contact. And it was amazing when I walk in, and of course, as a new minister, they have your photo up there, you know, who you are. And so I walk up, and by the way, I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, you automatically say hello. So when I walk into the department and I go up and I see someone, an employee there, and I'll say, "Hi, I'm Judy Foote, who are you and what do you do?" Well, the reaction was they kind of jumped back. It's like, "Oh, you're the minister." And I said, "No, I'm Judy Foote. What do you do? And what is your name?" And it took a while for them to actually make eye contact. And what I'm finding when we talk about acknowledging the community, it's so important for those who work within the department to really believe that we are sincere when we say we want to hear from you. We want to know what you do. It's important. You matter. We're there as leaders. I've been asked to lead a department of government, but I'm not the one who does the work. It's those who work within the department, many of you here who work within departments, who actually do the work. So it's a culture change within government that's happening, that I'm finding, that people are starting to feel more comfortable. When I go into the department now, when I walk up to someone, now they say hi. And I've said to them, oh, when they say minister, I would say, no, the only minister I know is the one at my church. I'm Judy. Who are you? And you would not believe the number of employees that call me Judy, which is great. Makes me feel comfortable, and they feel comfortable. Then we go up to the 18th floor in Portage. Beautiful office, great view of the parliamentary precinct. And I'm looking out there and I'm thinking, I wonder how many employees have ever been on the 18th floor in this office. It's not my office, it's theirs. So we're doing coffee breaks, 35, 40 people at a time, bringing them up for coffee. And what's really interesting is that of the 35, 40, maybe 2 or 3 actually know each other because they're working in this building over in Portage and they rarely get to interact with each other. So it's about changing the culture, and that's why acknowledging the community is really important. But as well, when we get back to embracing innovation and transformation, it's also about a transformation. It's about people thinking differently, about appreciating the fact that they're being acknowledged and that they have important work to do. And I think that's what we all need to be doing in terms of making sure that we get the kind of contribution, I guess, a kind of work performed based on their level of comfortability and the fact that they feel respected. And I think that's a key role for us who are in leadership roles, is to let those who we work with, and notice I say work with, not they don't work for me, they don't work for government, they work with government. And we need to let them know that they're respected.
Excellent. I'm wondering if... I was just wondering if Minister Judy is like Judge Judy. I don't know the relation. Wayne.
Well, having worked in the public service for 37 years, I guess I could say, hi, Judy. Rather unusual for me. So, thank you, everyone, and it's great to be on this panel. I do want to start by recognizing OpenText, one of the sponsors, and particularly Tom Jenkins, because I guess he felt, being a public servant so long, that I never have quite the right wardrobe, so he bought these socks for me last night to wear. So that kind of check, I think it is pretty neat. Goes with my polka dot tie, so here we are. Look, I think many of the things that Judy, the minister, said, I would have to agree with. I think if I go down through this, is there anything missing? I would maybe have added to, and I am a public servant, but I probably would have added to the fourth one by saying embracing innovation, transformation, and risk-taking. Because I really do think to really make this go, there is going to be risks that ministers and governments are going to have to take, because it is reaching out in new and different ways. And we know, no matter how well we can control the process of reaching out, there will potentially be those out there who decide they want to sabotage the process. It's unfortunate, but it's part of Canada, part of democracy. And so I think leaders and ministers and governments, they are going to have to take a different, the risk level has to, I think, change in order to do this. That would be one. The other that always interested me in open dialogue, and clearly open dialogue is about reaching citizens. I don't disagree. That's very much part of it. But I'm also cognizant of the fact of, the capacity of public servants to resolve some of these very difficult, complex issues that we face, our country faces, or our province faces. We have tremendous public servants, but I've often thought of open dialogue also as a tool where we actually can go out on these very difficult issues and reach experts. So it's a way, a dialogue with experts, not only in Canada, around the world, about challenges facing the country. So there's clearly, it's citizen engagement and reaching citizens the most important. But we can use these interactive tools to gather knowledge and information that we don't necessarily have within the Government of Canada or Ontario or whatever. And so how can you also use this as a form of open dialogue of those who have looked at these issues around the world that we're grappling with and have solutions? So using it for many different purposes than maybe how this is structured. That would be another comment I would have.
Excellent. Minister Deb.
So I am actually comfortable with all of the principles that are here. There are some that I think kind of need some kind of underlining. I think we still have some challenges around engaging unlikely participants. You know, I think there's some people are inclined to participate. I think this is a way of getting more people to participate, but there will still be the large majority of people who don't participate. So I think we have to be very deliberate in understanding who is and who isn't participating, and how do we actually get those unlikely participants to participate, because they will bring, for sure, a richness to the conversation that we won't have without them participating. I think Paul Bourne said something, for those of you who were here yesterday when he spoke, that has really stuck with me, and that's the power of listening, the power of actually understanding. Those of you who studied sociology might remember Max Weber's concept of Verstehen, where it's really about getting into the head of people, understanding where they are, not just going out and asking people to answer our questions, but listening to what are the challenges that people want us to address. When I was doing consultations on poverty reduction, I traveled, spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people, many of whom, not a majority though, of people who actually had lived experience. But one person said to me, and I'll never forget it, she said, "Deb, listen to me. People live in poverty because they don't have enough money. Don't give us more programs, give us more money." And you know, it was one of those aha moments that didn't actually fit into the questions that we were asking. So that free ourselves to listen. We're not going to be able to respond to every concern that is raised, but I really do think we need to figure a way to go quite a bit deeper into where people are at. So that, to me, speaks to the depth of engagement. It's no longer just a yes, no, for or against world that we're living in. We have to dig a lot deeper. The last point I'm going to make on this round, at least, is this notion of relevance and scope. That we have to be really honest with people about what the limitations are. Often they are fiscal limitations. You know, you look at the pre-budget consultations, the lists of expenditures. I had one colleague on the standing committee that traveled around the province, and she just kept a list every day of how much money each request cost. And she'd at the end of the day say, well, today was a $500 million day. And, you know, so people have to be reasonable about the context in which we're working. And I think we have to be very upfront about what is within the realm of the possible. So I will leave it at that.
Very good.
And pass it down.
Well, thank you, Minister, and former Minister. So,
No, I was never a minister.
thank you, Mr. Wouters. So, you know, I think when I look at the principles, I think if there's an element to add here, is kind of designing towards the end point, right? You know, looking over the horizon. You know, is that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years over the horizon? And we have the opportunity to really get to full participatory democracy. and 33 million connected citizens, right? And we look at the scale of other digital services and digital forums hitting the marks of billions. We're speaking about an open dialogue to scale over the horizon to 33, 34, 35 million connected citizens. And it feels it's a lofty goal, but it's achievable, right? To get this to this over the horizon goal of full participatory democracy. And with that comes a new volume of information, a new volume and a new voice of 33 million participants. And how do you manage that, right? How do you have a closed loop system to make sure individuals are not necessarily just yelling into the rain, if you will, but there's a mechanism to harvest that input, process that input, and you're not going to please everybody, right? So what has to come out of that is a set of priorities, probably more no's than yeses, but having a closed loop system. So, so maybe my comments a little more around one, let's just keep staying focused on the over-horizon goal that Canada has an opportunity to truly, through open dialogue, have a full participatory democracy. And we have a habit of, I'll quote Shakespeare, being a small but perfectly formed country, but then we divide it into even smaller pieces and make the challenge even harder. But if we can find a way to continue to keep this sort of effort together, to get to that full participatory democracy, it would be a beautiful thing. And then secondly, in terms of the principles, is getting a closed loop mechanism, because we're not going to be able to please everyone through the principles. And what's that closed loop system to say, thank you, we listened, we had mechanisms to be able to processes, to be able to process through this, and here's what's come out of the current set of priorities, and here's the mandates, and through another cycle again. So.
And maybe what I'll do is I'll pull together some of the observations you've each made, because there's some commonality. And I really like your point about the long-term view, so 2, 3, 5, 6 years, because where we've been historically on open dialogue and consultations is there's an immediate policy challenge that we need to launch a consultation process on, and that may have a 6-month window. And that works fine for pilot projects. It doesn't work for changing the internal processes, as you point out, and then changing the culture within the organization. And I've heard each of you touch on some element of risk. You've either said risk or failure. I have the advantage of looking over Mark's shoulder, and he wrote down risk and circled it twice on his notepad. And there's an element of distinction in companies like OpenText and Google where the assumption of risk is inherent in the business process, but alongside it comes the acceptance of failure. And that's often, when I have conversations with people in this room and elsewhere, their reluctance to engage in much larger, more ambitious projects comes down to the sort of observation you were making, Judy, around, well, I'll get noticed by the minister, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And the environment really needs to shift so that within organizations they can recognize that putting your foot forward and making a misstep isn't necessarily a career-destroying move, and that they'll have the support both within the department or within the organization as well as the minister's offices. And I thought maybe if each of you, or whether it's just the ministers, could react to the desire, the ability, and then the energy to provide that sort of backstop to your departmental employees.
I think the point you've made about taking risk is really important, because obviously one of the things that we've said in the department is I don't have that expertise or that experience to respond to all of the inquiries we get or to media inquiries. So what we've done is we've lifted the veil and we've said, feel free to talk to the media. If you have the experience and the expertise and you feel comfortable talking to the media, feel free to do so. Ultimately, the buck stops with me, but don't ever feel that you can't make a mistake. We all make mistakes, so no one is perfect, but we learn from our mistakes. So we've said to them, of course you can talk to the media. It's about being open, it's about being accessible, It's about being transparent. I'm chairing, thank you to the Prime Minister, a cabinet committee on open and transparent government. And when I was asked to chair this committee, I'm thinking, okay, open government. What do we mean by open government? Well, we want to make sure that Canadians have access to information. They need to know what their government is doing. They need to be able to have input. We need to have that open dialogue so that whatever we're making decisions on, Canadians can become aware of it and comment on it. And it goes back to being prepared to listen to what Canadians are saying. From our perspective, certainly as a department, let's take the National Shipbuilding Strategy. For one, somebody said to me earlier, what did you do to end up getting procurement as your portfolio? What did you do wrong? It's a golden opportunity to get something right. The issue for us is that when we talk about the National Shipbuilding Strategy, and there are all these questions out there about costs, about time, it's one of the most complex shipbuilding platforms that the country's ever undertaken. But the reality is that people are suspicious about it and questioning it because they don't have the information. So what we're doing is we're going to be, every quarter, putting out information about the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Numbers will be there. People will be able to see where we are as we go through the process. We'll report to Parliament on an annual basis. Canadians need to know what their government is doing with respect to whether it's the Navy, where we make sure that they have the ships that they need, or whether it's the Canadian Coast Guard, but they need to feel comfortable because what we're doing is using taxpayers' dollars. So we need to be open about what we're doing there. And will we make mistakes along the way? You betcha. But when we do, you will know, and you'll be able to say to us, well, did you think about doing something this way instead of the way that you did it? So it's a matter of engaging Canadians as well. And I think we really need to be open about that process. We need to be transparent and provide as much information as we possibly can.
So my perspective actually would be fairly different than yours, because I think that this risk of openness is something we really need to explore, and it's easy to pretend that we're not afraid of risk, that we're not risk averse, but I tell you, we on the political side we work in a very toxic political environment. We face an hour of question period every day where opposition members do their job, which is to oppose and to critique. And open information, open data gives opposition parties ammunition to ask questions. You'll never hear the questions about the really good stuff that's revealed. You'll hear really hard questions about the bad stuff that's revealed. That is the nature of our world, right? So I was Minister of Health in Ontario for 5 years, introduced something called the Excellent Care for All Act, which is all about transparency on quality metrics in hospitals and other healthcare institutions. So hospitals had to report on things like hospital-acquired infection rates and so on. This was information that hospitals collected individually, but they never compared to other hospitals how they were doing. Nobody knew, even people who worked in the hospitals, CEOs of hospitals, didn't know how they were doing relative to other hospitals in Ontario. So just giving that information, making it public, has driven fantastic change. We're seeing rates coming down because nobody wants to be in the lowest quintile. Yeah. But I tell you, from an opposition perspective, they just focus, and I'm not talking just politically, journalists as well, focus only on the worst. You never hear the stories about the best. So I think, yes, we have to develop a culture where we're prepared to take risk as government. We have to liberate people from fear of that. But at the same time, I think we need to educate journalists and others about how to understand the information that is revealed.
Can
And if I
I just make
He had his hand up
we're-
first.
Not a minister, but I was going to jump in.
I
and two.
interrupted Wayne, so.
Yeah, after Wayne, please.
I think because it's really good to hear. I think all of us who've spent our life in the public service, first and foremost, this will not happen without political leadership. No matter what we all wanted to do, if our political leaders aren't there, governments will not be open. It has to begin with political leadership, as we heard from Minister Wynne this morning. She's committed to open
Premier.
government. Premier, sorry. What did I say?
Minister.
So, Premier Wynne. She is open. She's very much a supporter of open government, and that is the beginning of a cultural change. But, you know, and look, I'm part of this, but that's necessary. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient because we've created in Canada, at least at the federal level, a public service that's so rules-bound that even though you say, let's be open, we're living every day by procurement, financial, HR rules. We have checkers checking checkers. We have 13 agents of parliament and other like bodies who are watching over us every single hour of the day. How can you be innovative and open and transparent and take this on when you feel if I'm doing something, I'm breaking a rule? This has to end. And I'm partly responsible. I was a senior public servant who lived through that. But, you know, if you go back, I think you go back to sponsorship where, you know, we lost a government on a management failure. We began to put new rules in. And then another government came along and said, hey, I have this thing called the Federal Accountability Act. I got some more ideas for rules. So this has to be dealt with at the same time. Otherwise, the public service will not be able to follow what sometimes now where we're seeing our political leaders are.
Mark.
Oh, I think that was extremely well said. I mean, this comes down to, and I speak from the private sector side, so it's hard for me to completely understand all the rocks you carry in your backpacks every day. I guess I carry maybe a different set of rocks in my backpack, but you know, innovation really has three core elements. It takes capital, it takes talent, and it takes a certain cultural element. And on the cultural side, you know, to quote Peter Drucker, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. And we can never underestimate the cultural challenge that it takes to drive massive change. And I've heard this, you know, through the last 2 days as one of the top themes, and as Wayne was just speaking about. And part of that culture is being able to take risk. And you know, if we think of, you know, the Silicon Valley South esprit de corps and the Silicon Valley North esprit de corps between, you know, the Toronto-Waterloo corridor, risk is accepted. I mean, risk and failure is accepted. It's okay. Version 1 didn't work, right? Maybe the market wasn't ready. Maybe the business plan wasn't quite right. Version 2, we got a little closer. Version 3, failure is actually a badge of honor, and celebrate it as you're getting to the perfect product or the perfect climate, right, to do something. It's a badge of honor.
Government needs private sector people to stand up and say exactly that, because we're not allowed a failure on version 1 in government.
That's right.
There's
Yeah,
very
good
little
point.
tolerance. So, thank you.
Yeah.
So we need, in fact, we've sort of looked at our IT and compared ourselves, benchmarked ourselves against private sector. Everybody thinks government IT is terrible.
Yeah.
It's not. It's even better than private sector. So, but we need people, knowledgeable people, third party, not ministers standing up and saying, what's all this hullabaloo about? Because they're actually doing great.
Yeah. Well, it's a cultural element that
yes.
is as important as principles and outcomes, right?
So folks, the time is ticking away. I do want to say this, is that we'd like to give you some time at the microphone. So I'm going to ask one more quick question of our two ministers, Judy and Deb, and then we're going to open the floor to you. So that gives you a couple of minutes just to think about what questions you want to put to our panel and what things you might really want to know. And the questions I want to put to the two of you really are just thinking ahead, how do we take a step forward? Like if you had to go somewhere and do something in government that would move the yardsticks, what might it be? Deb, would you like to start?
Sure. Those of you who heard the Premier this morning know that Ontario is really committed to this project, and we are taking important steps forward, but we are just at the beginning of this. So we've got a number of projects out there now on open dialogue. We want to do more. And so for me, I think we're moving at the right pace, that we're learning as we go. I think there's huge opportunity to do more nationally by getting provinces, territories, and the federal government working together. We have the opportunity to be a real global powerhouse on this if we take advantage of the opportunity that's before us. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we're moving right now at the right speed, but 6 months from now, it will need to be accelerated. So I'm excited about the direction, and I'm very optimistic.
Excellent. Minister.
Thank you. I think the fact that the Prime Minister has put in place a Cabinet Committee on Open and Transparent Government says it all in terms of where we are as a government and how we want to move forward. Leading by example, making sure that when we do something that we're very open and transparent about it. And I think the President of the Treasury Board was here and he talked about open.canada.ca. And it's a way to engage Canadians. And if we're seen as a government prepared to engage Canadians, we will see change, we will see transformation taking place. For us, I think it's really important to be seen, not just to be seen to be reaching out, but to be actually doing it. And one of the things that I do whenever I move outside of the bubble of Ottawa and I go to another province, I make a point of visiting with those public servants who work in our department. Because they are the ones who are actually doing the work on the ground. We're doing work here in Ottawa, obviously, but it's really important if we're going to look at this from a coast-to-coast-to-coast perspective, that we acknowledge those public servants who work throughout the country and learn from them. So I think it goes back to what Deb said earlier about listening. We can learn from those who work in the public service. Those of us who are in leadership positions, leadership being, a minister or a deputy minister, an ADM. But I can tell you that of the public servants that I've met since I became a minister, they're leaders. They're the ones that are doing things right. They're the ones that are out in the field doing what needs to be done on behalf of Canadians. And so I think it's really important for us to lead by example, by listening, by being prepared to do things differently, by being prepared to acknowledge that, for instance, in the department that I'm leading, we're looking at e-procurement. How do we do procurement more effectively? How do we do it differently? We work with the industry associations. We look with our Supplier Advisory Council. So it's reaching out. So if we lead by example, then you'll find industry wanting to get engaged. You'll find employees wanting to get engaged. But I think that onus is on us as leaders to do that and to do it in a way that people feel comfortable knowing that their ideas will be taken seriously.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the talking stick over here to my co-moderator, Colin, and let him moderate you.
Great. There's a question from Twitter on the screen here that kind of fits into a question I was going to follow up with to your very strong comments, Wayne, and some of yours, ministers. And from Twitter, Nick Scott asks, what's our definition of risk and or an example of acceptable risk taking in the public service? And I'll make an observation first, which is, Wayne, you made some really strong comments about the level of supervision that public servants feel under, particularly on the federal level. And I think Mark and I can speak to the level of supervision that we in industry feel that we're under as well. And a question, when we go through a hiring process to find someone for a company, we try to find people that have an incremental understanding of risk and have an awareness of how do they manage to implement projects within the regulatory or legal framework that governs our businesses. And by that I mean they recognize that there are risks within the activities they're undertaking, but they also have the judgment to say, this is a file or an issue where I can push on the risk-taking in this project. And the impulse I often find when speaking to my public service colleagues, is there's a rush to no, because no reflects this perception that there's political risk that can't be addressed. So from Nick, what would your definition of risk be? And would it be variable depending on the situation?
Well, I think, for me, I've always found as a leader in government that nobody knows their program or service or if it's internal delivery more than the individuals that are actually doing it.
That's right.
The folks at the coalface or people who are working on it in Ottawa. And, what I worry about is that once, as you say, everything, the view that no matter what I bring forward, it's always going to be all the reasons why we can't do it. Eventually, folks stop bringing the ideas forward. And I think that's the worry that I would have. Taking risk would be to feel that you can, I've been working on this program for 10 years. Why do we keep doing it this way? Here's another way that I think would work a lot better, and I'm going to bring that forward. And I just don't think we allow that. We don't allow the safe space for people to try different things themselves as they manage the programs, or to be even to bring forward those ideas for a discussion and a debate, and let's hope an open debate. I think I started in government where I felt I could solve everything. And it kind of carried with me in my life, I think, because I always thought that's how government works. But you begin to realize over time that many people who follow me don't have those degrees of freedom that I have, and aren't willing, therefore, to come forward. And I think that's what acceptable risk-taking is in the public service.
Well, from procurement perspective, in terms of an example of acceptable risk-taking, I've been tasked with modernizing procurement. Yeah. So I need input from those who have been involved in procurement all of these years. I'm a new minister to this portfolio. I don't have the answers, but I want to work with those who've been doing it for years and have them feel comfortable approaching us and saying, well, why don't we do this? We've looked at one way where we've combined, a systems integrator with a design for one of our ships, our surface combatant ship. And the idea is, if you can find an existing system, then that saves time and that saves money. So that idea can be both savings in terms of cost, and the Navy can get their ships much sooner. But people need to feel comfortable coming forward with those kinds of recommendations. And if I'm challenged, if my task is to modernize procurement, then I have to be open to hearing new and different ways of doing things.
And one of the elements on the commercial or private sector side is building confidence, right? Instead of the moonshot, right, maybe you go for the meter stick, right, first, and the organization, takes the incremental steps of risk, and failure, if it doesn't work, is a fast failure, and that's very manageable risk. But finding the early wins, building the confidence, and what used to be risk is now just norm, and then building on top of those successes.
We have a question from the floor here.
Hi there, my name is Megan Halstern. I'm a former federal public servant now working in Toronto with a group called Civic Tech Toronto that Kathleen Wynne gave a shout out to this morning. We provide space for citizens to collaborate on civic problems together using data, design, and technology. Thank you for sharing your insights on some of the challenges that we're facing in terms of getting towards this open dialogue. A lot of this is focused on sort of the originators of the open dialogue, the government side, the public service side. I'm curious to hear what role citizens and community groups like mine play in opening up this space for open dialogue and maybe accelerating it.
Sure. Do you want to get started with that? Sure. So I think that's a really important question, because this has been a very government-focused conference, and I think that the community broadly has as much to bring to the conversation as government does. One of the consultations that we're doing using Open Dialogue is about accessibility certification. So does a restaurant or a retail establishment meet accessibility standards. We went out thinking that government would set the standards and enforce the standards. Through open dialogue, we actually found the community was prepared to take on accessibility certification. That's going to be way better than government doing it. So I think the point you're bringing to the conversation is we're all in this together. And it's okay for government to step back and say, you know, this is something the community should be doing. The work that Tamarack is doing, that Paul Bourne talked about, is very much about community taking ownership and not waiting for government. So I think you bring something really important to this, just to remind us that we are all in this together.
Thank you for that. We're getting signals here that we're going to have to close this soon. So I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to pose one last question. Oh, was there another one? I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yes?
Can I make some just quick points? I think ministers can do a lot to set the tone in a ministry and to make it clear that they need the people at the coalface advising them. Monique Bégin used to tell the story that she finally realized that the deputy didn't know any more than she did about most of the questions. And so she always asked for the person working on the file to brief her rather than the ADM or the deputy. So that can make a difference. Secondly, in the process of the development of a cabinet document, do the ministers on the panel think that it would ever be possible to put out the options that are going to be on their table out for public discussion and then even an organized deliberative dialogue about it? Because that's the part the public doesn't know. They don't know what hasn't been considered often. So that's another suggestion. Parliamentary committees, how they're resourced, both for the research that gets done and also the money they have to travel. I would think that's another place where moving out makes a difference. And then the other point is political parties. To what extent are political parties reaching out, both in a substantive way, not only in the 3 messages a day you get to send money, but in the actual reaching out in terms of discussion. After all, going back to the point that David Brock from the MWT made about members of parliament, political parties are the vehicles for making views known about what direction you want the country to go in. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to have to wrap up briefly, so I'll give you just a very quick moment or two to respond to that, if either of you would like to in particular. So a lot of that was addressed to our ministers.
Well, it's very valid points, and certainly when departments are looking at different aspects or different pieces of legislation, in a lot of cases, of course, legislation is looked at by parliamentary committees as well. And a lot of these committees, of course, go on the road and consult with Canadians, and a lot of what you get back then helps to, I guess, make up the legislation on a go-forward basis. But some very valid points there. Again, it goes back to being open and being and accessible and to listening, because we need to listen to what Canadians are saying.
Sure. You had a lot in there, so let me focus on one part, and that is the role of political parties. And I think it is worth noting that we will still have political parties, and political parties have different visions of where the country should be going, and that's good and that is healthy. Somebody earlier asked the question about whether open dialogue complements current political processes or whether it replaces what we have. And I think we'd all agree it ought to complement. I don't think anybody is suggesting that we are moving to consensus government here through open dialogue. So I think the role of the parties is to really set the big direction. This is where we want to go. These are priorities. And also to set some specific promises during a campaign. We're going to take this step. And it's not really an appropriate open dialogue conversation because you ran on it, you're going to do it. You might want to consult on how you're going to do it. And that's, so I do see it as complementary. What happens with the political process where we've got 3 or more parties with different notions of where we need to go. And I don't think the open dialogue is going to change that in the foreseeable future.
Well, let me just take a second to thank our panelists. I wish we actually had another hour. I wish we could go into a whole bunch of the questions we were talking about that we didn't get to, but it's been great. It's been great. So thank you all very much for your candid comments. Thank you to Colin for his capable keeping the other side together. And we're going to pass now, I think, in a moment, back over to Wayne, who's going to take you through the really good and important and hard work you're going to do in the principles for the next little while before we bring this to a grand conclusion. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.